Zaki the Sun is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
Welcome back to Nostalgia Theater. It has been a little while, but I can't think of a better subject to discuss for this return engagement, and a better guest to talk about it with. The subject is Superman. The guest is Glenn Greenberg. This is two great tastes that go great together. Glenn, welcome back.
Thank you, Zaki. Up, and away.
I like it. So I have not recorded a Nostalgia Theater show in a while. It's been probably more than a year for sure, and a lot of that is just because I've been ridiculously busy in the pandemic era. And the other thing is, like, I needed a subject that sort of that pulled me from my usual day-to-day stupor. And, of course, the 85th anniversary of Superman is certainly reason enough to do that. Now, we are going to talk about Superman, but the reason I have you on is because you are currently on newsstands with Superman-related content. Can you tell the audience what that is?
Yes. I've been doing for the past few years, they're called bookazines, which are a single subject 100-page magazines with like cardstock covers, and you see them at supermarkets, Barnes and Noble, pharmacies, and the one that I have out on the stands right now is called The Story of Superman, and it's got a beautiful illustration of one of my all-time favorite Supermans, Christopher Reeve, flying right at you. I think they kind of repurposed the poster art from Superman 4. So this is like the only good thing that's ever come out of Superman 4. But it's called The Story of Superman. It's published by A360 Media, and it's been out for a few weeks now, and it's to tie in with the 85th anniversary, and it is, like the title says, it is the story of Superman from the very beginning, the creation by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and it takes you all the way from the 1930s, all the way to pretty much now. I was working on this. The funny thing is, I have just finished the final chapter. Which was touting the return of Henry Cavill to the role.
Whoops!
And the day after I turned in the final chapter, the news came out that he wasn't returning after all. And so I literally had to email my editor like right away. As soon as the news hit, I went, "Oh shit!" And I emailed my editor and I said, "Can you send me back the last chapter? I got to rewrite it." So that's how up to date we are with this particular book. But it really is the full story. It's the comic books and how that evolved into the newspaper strip and the radio show and the animated shorts by the Fleischers and the television shows, the movies. It's pretty much all here. And I had the privilege of speaking to a lot of the people who were responsible for the comic books, the people who made the comic books, the legendary pieces of work that they are. And I got to speak to Ilya Salkind, who was the producer of the first 3 Superman movies with Christopher Reeve and Supergirl and the Adventures of Superboy TV series.
So it's funny you talk about Superman 4 being on the cover. I noted that when I was seeing it on the stand, and it's funny because a week or so earlier, I have the posters of the original theatrical size release posters of all 4 Christopher Reeve movies, and I remember I gazed at the Superman 4 poster, and I was like, that is a good poster for such a shit movie. And I just had that thought, and I was like, oh well, your editors must have had that same notion based on what made it onto the cover here.
Yeah, I don't imagine how they couldn't have thought that.
I mean, it really is. I think of those four, like I would feel pretty good about hanging that up on the wall, because I think it's a great evocation of the Reeve version of that character, and I'd prefer that over, the one where he's flying with Richard Pryor. Maybe that's just me.
Oh. Well, the thing is I don't select the images. I don't see the images or the cover until the book is pretty much ready to go.
Right.
So when they sent me the PDF to do like the final proofread through it, I was struck. I was like, "Whoa, that's the cover!"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's Superman 4." Well, we don't want the Superman 4 association, but boy, that's a striking image. So I was very pleased. I thought, like, well, number one, great, Christopher Reeve. That's my Superman. So I was happy about that. But it really is. It's a colorful, striking shot, and I think it makes for a really good cover.
And I think it tells you something, that here we are. Nearly 20 years after Chris Reeve passed away, 36 years after his last film, and yet we want to celebrate Superman. Boom, we have Chris Reeve on the cover. Isn't that something?
It is. Well, it just, I mean, he, like with Bela Lugosi with Dracula, it's you cannot shake that image.
Yeah.
And he was so ideal for that role. And it's something I get into in the book, is what he brought to that role. And I get into a little bit of why nobody has been able to not even surpass him, but equal him.
Yeah.
Whether it's not a besmirching of the actors. But there's a lot of factors involved, and I think that the last two guys who played him in the movies, I think Brandon Routh and Henry Cavill, both had an opportunity to do a great job. Again, maybe not to surpass him. Maybe they could have come close. I just think that the odds were stacked against them because they weren't given the material that they needed to really knock it out of the park. Yeah. I've seen both of them in other roles where they have been, excellent. And it was like, oh my God, if only they could have brought that kind of personality, that kind of charm to Superman. But you can only do so much when you're dealing with a particular script and a particular direction that the producers or the director want. And I think that there was an alchemy, a magic, when you bring together Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve and John Williams and all the other people, Margot Kidder, that just fell into place. And it's really, really hard to duplicate that. And I think that because of all of that, Christopher Reeve remains the one to beat.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I want to talk about the on-screen iterations, but maybe let's circle back to that, because I think we are talking about the 85th anniversary, and you did spend such a lengthy amount of time in this bookazine going into the roots of the character. So let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. 85 years later, Superman is a present tense character. He is not, he's not the Shadow or the Phantom, or like characters who exist, and we value them, and they have a cultural footprint, not diminishing, Tarzan or anything else, but they are not present tense concerns the way Superman is. You can walk down the streets of downtown San Francisco, and you will see, a not insignificant number of people wearing a Superman T-shirt.
Sure.
And that's impressive for any pop culture character to have this many years later. So give me your theories on that. Why Superman? Why still?
Well, I think that he taps into so many things that are part of the human psyche. I think that he he's relatable in a way because he is so many different things. He's an amalgamation of so many different things that get right to the heart of the human condition and the human imagination. I mean, he's Gilgamesh, he's Samson, he's Hercules. It's an immigrant story. He's Moses, he's Jesus. I mean, anything you want to read into him, chances are you're going to find it. I mean, in some ways, and I think it was the late George Perez who first turned me on to the idea that Superman is the ultimate immigrant. Because the same way, Bob Hope was born in England, and yet we consider him like an American icon. And it's the same with Superman. He wasn't even born on this planet, but he is Earth's greatest champion. And he was, again, not born in America, but he is the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. So there, right there is your immigrant story. He was sent down by a higher being to help humanity and serve as a role model to humanity. Well, there's your Jesus story. He was sent down the river to escape certain doom in a basket, right? So it taps into so much of our religion, our mythology, the stories that we look to for guidance and for hope and comfort, and plus he's the ultimate action hero. Like I said, Gilgamesh, Hercules, Samson, and he's aspirational. He's got all these powers that we would love to have. I mean, who doesn't want to fly? And also he is the ultimate role model. He's somebody that you want to believe in. You wish that somebody like that existed in the world. And my it's just so funny because just the other day I was watching one of the key scenes from Superman the movie, and I got actually kind of sad because nobody like that really does exist in the world. Someone who just radiates pure goodness, and boy, do we need that right now.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that one of the themes that I deal with in the book is Superman too old fashioned? Is he too much of a goody two shoes to still be relevant? And my feeling is is Jesus?
Yeah.
Is Jesus too much of a goody two shoes to believe in now? To serve as an example, as something that we should aspire to be like? If not, then why is Superman?
That's so interesting. There's a great line in the second or third episode of Lois and Clark where Lois, played by Terry Hatcher, she's talking. Superman has been forced to go away because of some threat from Lex Luthor or something or other, and so it's like, oh, where's Superman? And Clark says, "Oh yeah, Lois, that'd be a great story for you, wouldn't it? Like, where's Superman?" And she has this. She says, it's the idea of Superman, someone to believe in, someone to build a few hopes around. Whatever he can do, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always loved that line, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean there's the sense of like, oh, he's so overpowered, he can do everything, and I'm always like, the what makes Superman interesting as a character is it's not that he is so good. It's that goodness, the pressure that must put on him of like all the things he can't do.
Right.
Right. And that's the stuff that I think certainly the best comic book stories have really drilled down on without really having to make the character, hashtag grimdark or so some of the avenues that certain storytellers have gone down, which I think when you take a long view, you say, well, there is a version of this character that does tend to transcend. Going back to the origins, I think it's interesting as well that as created by Siegel and Schuster, he was less powerful than he is now.
Sure.
They didn't engineer the flying powers into him right from the jump. That came later, things like that. And yet that something that was really key was the love triangle for two.
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that has sort of I would say fallen aside now, and I think that just says something about the longevity of the character. But I think it's interesting to me that Siegel and Schuster, I think to some extent, were coming at it from being picked on as kids, and it was like, oh, if they knew what I was really like, then they would love me,
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I mean, just look at the pictures of Siegel and Schuster. They were Clark Kent, or
That's
at least they were the Clark Kent that Superman tries to portray to the world. Meek, bespectacled, not particularly noteworthy in terms of appearance or in terms of the aura that they give off. But Siegel, we know that Siegel, had crushes on a lot of the girls that he went to school with, and one of them even just came out and said years later that she wouldn't have given them the time of day, and so yeah, I mean they were, I think Siegel in particular was working out a lot of his issues. I mean, right down to there's a whole section about the impact that the death of his father might have had on him, which Brad Meltzer wrote about in one of his books. That his father died during a robbery at his store, and it's not necessarily proven that the robbers killed his father, but his father definitely had a heart attack, I think, during the robbery. And whether the robbery caused the heart attack, that's all up in the air. But just think about this kid who loses his father in the midst of a crime, and then goes on to create the greatest crime fighter, that the world has ever known. There's got to be something there.
Yeah.
So it seems like there was a lot that Jerry Siegel was putting into this concept of his.
It is so interesting when you think about it that Superman is such a primal archetypal character that you sort of say, like, somebody had to invent him. Like there was no Superman until there was, right. Like we had superheroic characters and things like that, but sort of the costumed superhero, he was first out the chute. And again, you're just like, how did no one else think of that?
I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, I mean, even the people who published Superman at first thought it was ridiculous. They thought, one of the executives at what became known as DC Comics, back then it was National Periodicals, looked at that first cover of Action Comics and #1 and said, this is ridiculous. Don't ever put this character on the cover again. And I think that had something to do with it. Just like nobody had come along to that would take that kind of thing seriously enough. And basically all that they really did was just take bits and pieces here, bits and pieces there, and just put it together in this amalgam that hadn't been done before. At the time, I mean, there was a little bit of the shadow that was in Superman. The whole thing about the multiple identities. Popeye was one of the inspirations. This guy with super strength. They wanted to do it as a newspaper strip. That was the original plan. That they wanted to do it as a newspaper strip, in the tradition of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Popeye, and all that. So that's really where their minds and their hearts were before it all became what we knew it to be.
Yeah, and that too is so astonishing when you think about it, because had he originated in newspaper strips and had that been his specific domain, it's very likely he would not be talked about today the way he is.
That's an excellent point. On the other hand, Siegel and Schuster might have been a lot wealthier.
Man, you talk about, wow, that's okay. Well, it's you got right to something I was going to talk about. Let's talk about how they got screwed over by DC. you got there ahead of me.
Well, okay. Sorry to jump the gun. It just seemed to fit.
I think that the fact that you have this character who embodies such goodness and fair play and everything else, all the quote unquote cliches, and yet, I mean, objectively, these guys got royally hosed.
Mm-hmm.
I think, whatever rights agreement or credit agreement was arrived at in time for the 78 movie, I mean, it's nice, but let's be real, it's a pittance compared to what they should objectively have gotten throughout their lifetime.
Well, that's the point, and that's the comic book publishing industry. I mean, that's just the history is exploit the writers and the artists as much as you possibly can, keep as much of the riches for yourself, and that's been the way the industry is run, pretty much from the beginning. Did they know what they were signing? Pretty much. Did they have in their wildest imaginations the notion that Superman would become as successful as it became? Nobody did. And so, they were coming from the position of look how much this thing is making. We created it despite whatever we signed. From a moral standpoint, shouldn't we get a bigger piece of this pie?
Right.
And of course the company was going to say, nope. And therein lies the question, what's the legal thing and what's the right thing or the moral thing? Right. That's always been at the heart of this conflict. And it just got worse and worse and worse. As the more Superman became successful, the more bitter, especially Jerry Siegel became, because this was his brainchild, and he was making money. He was doing well. By the time that they left the book, they were making, probably close to like $1 million a year. I think something like that. I have to look at the book again. But the DC or National was making millions. I mean tens of millions. I mean, it was they were rolling in the dough. I mean, it was incredible how much they were making, and so that fueled it. And then there was the whole thing where he had pitched the idea. Jerry Siegel had pitched the idea of Superboy, and National rejected it. And then Siegel goes off to the Army. And Schuster, who I guess didn't go to the Army because his eyesight was so bad, but he gave Siegel a heads up while Siegel's off in the military serving in World War II, and said, "Hey, just got to give you a heads up. They're going with Superboy, and you're not writing it." And they basically took the script that Siegel had written as part of his pitch, and they gave it to another writer to rewrite, and they ran it, feeling that they owned Superboy because he was the derivative of Superman. So now they were trying to literally cheat Siegel out of this concept that he clearly came up with. He pitched it to them, and they had rejected it. And then as soon as he's away and can't keep a closer eye on what's going on there, they went ahead and did it anyway. And therein lie the real impetus behind the famous lawsuit in 1948, where Siegel and Schuster sued to get the rights back, and that ended up causing him to be exiled from Superman for decades.
And I think as an adjunct to this tale of woe is the fact that this piece of shit Bob Kane essentially took notes. Sorry, I'm going to call it like it is. I call Batman.
No. I'm just.
I call him Batman's greatest villain, Bob Kane.
I'm not laughing at that. I'm just laughing at I didn't know we could use such salty language on the show.
Normally no, but I make an exception for Bob Kane.
I don't disagree with you. Oh my! I was actually talking about all of this yesterday, as recently as yesterday, and I probably used even saltier language. But this This wasn't on a show.
For people who are listening who are wondering what I'm talking about, Bob Kane is for a long time was credited as the sole creator of Batman, who was created a year after Superman, and I feel like he took notes on what Siegel and Schuster did wrong, and essentially did everything possible to make himself the sole beneficiary of Batman royalties and whatnot. So much so that he hosed his co-creator Bill Finger, who only recently has his family has seen some rectification of that. But again, enough of that piece of shit. I mean, it is one of the great ironies of pop culture history that this somebody whose conduct is egregiously awful, and created one of the greatest characters of all time. I mean, that's just sort of these are the ironies that make so many of these stories persist, I suppose.
Well, the other funny thing about all this is Superman being this paragon of virtue and goodness and morality and all that, and he throughout his entire history has fallen into the hands of some of the most unscrupulous, terrible, miser, just backstabbing people. I mean, across the board in whatever form of media that he's ended up in, he's been handled by some truly terrible people, who and some of them have been responsible for some of the most important contributions to shaping the character into what we know him to be today. Yeah. It's ironic and it's a little sad, but there you go.
Well, and in that vein, I mean, Mort Weisinger, who edited the Superman books, we're talking.
50s into the 60s. Actually, I think he got involved in the late 40s.
So pretty early on, he became sort of the gatekeeper of what went into the Superman mythos. And so I don't want to presume to speak for you, but it feels like Weisinger is one of those terrible people who nonetheless played a pretty important role in creating the milieu that the character was able to subsist within and really succeed in a manner that I don't think even Siegel and Schuster could have anticipated at that time.
You're absolutely right. In fact, I don't make any bones about it in the book. I try to give a balanced portrayal of Mort Weisinger. Brilliant editor. Managed to attract top writers, top artists, but Jim Shooter, who I interviewed for the book, made no bones about it. He said all of this about Weisinger, but added the fact that the guy was mean as a snake. I mean, he was just a rotten human being to the people that worked for him. And I go into some of the anecdotes. I mean, he was Kurt Swan quit the business temporarily because he just couldn't stand working for Weisinger. Wow. One of the writers threatened to throw him out of a window. One guy did quit the business altogether. And Glenn, we should mention Jim Shooter, you referred to. He was what, like 13 when he wrote for him? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean. There, it's not completely black and white because number one, he did give Shooter a chance, and especially at a time when Shooter really needed it because his family was financially struggling, and so Weisinger gave this kid a chance, and the kid had the talent to keep working. He kept giving him work, but knowing that his family was in such financial, dire straits, Weisinger would hold that over Shooter's head. And say, you're my charity case. Wow. This latest script you sent in stunk. Here's everything that's wrong with it. And what are you, an idiot? And what do you don't know how to spell? And so Shooter kind of felt like, I'm a loser. I mean, I don't know, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't hire me anymore. And he's like, no, I'll give you one last chance because you're my charity case. Meanwhile, around the office, apparently, he was bragging about, because this is my discovery. He would never tell this to Shooter, but he'd say, this is my discovery. Look at this kid. And I found him. I discovered him. He was proud of him, but he would never show it. On the same token, it was Weisinger who allowed Jerry Siegel to start writing Superman again, because Siegel again was in dire financial straits by the late 50s, early 60s, and he gave Siegel the chance to come back and start writing Superman again. And during that period, Siegel wrote some of the all-time greatest Superman stories: The Death of Superman. I think Superman's Return to Krypton. I think he wrote that one too. These
Superman
landmark.
Red, Superman Blue, wasn't that him?
I'm not 100% sure, so I wouldn't want to give you wrong information. But definitely The Death of Superman, the original Death of Superman.
The original, yeah, we should say.
So as he was doing now, the key thing is DC wasn't doing credit boxes in those days, so nobody knew that Siegel was writing these great stories, but he was getting the work. That was the important thing. Money was coming in, and yet supposedly he tortured Jerry Siegel. He would rake him over the coals and just rip him apart in the office in front of other people. This is the creator of the character. So yeah, he was not a great person to work for, and yet he understood his audience, and he knew how to appeal to them.
I mean, and by the way, just by way of correction, Leo Dorfman wrote Superman Red, Superman Blue, the Silver Age one. So just for folks listening, but yeah, I think that is the essential paradox at the heart of the Silver Age Superman, is that Weisinger shepherded this character, and so many of these important, really foundational, integral, what we think of culturally as integral elements of the character came in under his watch, right? So the Fortress of Solitude, and
all the stuff about Krypton. I mean, he's the one who basically created the society of Krypton for the Silver Age. Supergirl.
Yeah, and the different colored, the
Kryptonite.
rainbow kryptonite, and so that's what's so interesting, because what tends to happen is, no matter how far afield of those elements Superman tends to get, he does tend to touch back eventually to that, Crypto, the super dog, and things like that. We saw a lot of that in the comic books, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But even when you reboot it, eventually it sort of goes back to formula, and I don't mean formula in the negative sense, but those are things that are so heavily associated. I think we have to mention that the television series came in the 1950s, which is probably as big a factor in the character's longevity as anything else.
For sure. And you know what? I wasn't really cognizant of this until I researched to write this book, is just how involved the DC staff was in the TV show.
Right. Yeah, like Whitney Ellsworth was there, like when production. He wasn't like a quote unquote consultant, like he was there actively helping.
He was a producer.
Yeah.
And what would happen was that before each season, Whitney Ellsworth and Mort Weisinger would sit down and map out all of the story ideas for the next season's worth of episodes, and they would literally go beat for beat, work out the stories, and just hand them to the writers.
Now, what's so interesting about this television show is that, when I was a kid, obviously I grew up in the post Christopher Reeve era. So I'm like, well, Christopher Reeve is Superman. I don't know who that guy is, right. And yet, I watch the series now as an adult, and I'm just like, God damn, George Reeves is great. He is so good as Superman.
Well, I'd like to rebut. I think he was fine for the time.
He's playing the version of the character from the Silver Age comic books, and certainly I think his Clark is one of the best versions of Clark Kent in all of the different media.
Okay, I'm coming at it from a slightly different position in that I remember, because I'm a little bit older than you, I remember that the Superman TV show with George Reeves and the Batman show with Adam West used to be like back to back on TV when I was a little kid. I'm talking 5, 6 years old.
Okay.
And I fell in love with the Adam West Batman show. That's what got me into Batman in the first place, and that led to me getting into comic books. Okay, I loved it. I found Superman to be boring as hell. Just it did not appeal to me in any way, shape, or form, whether it was in black and white or whether it was in color. I just found Superman to be boring. I saw absolutely no variance between Superman and Clark Kent. I thought that George Reeves, I thought he was later on I was able to recognize how effective he was. But as a kid, I thought he was bland as Superman.
Oh, no. From a kid's perspective, I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, I'm in the same boat.
Plus the fact that, he didn't do much. I mean, he wasn't really showing off the powers that, I was aware of what he could do in the comic books, even though I wasn't a Superman comic book fan at that time either. Okay, so fast forward a few years, Christopher Reeve is introduced as Superman. I remember my parents, especially my dad, saying, "That's not Superman. George Reeves, he's Superman." And I gave my father like this look, like, okay, boomer. Yeah. But the Christopher Reeve Superman, that first movie, is what I was like, this is the Superman I've been waiting for all along. That's what I tapped into. And years later, I did try the TV series again. And I just felt like the opinions that I had when I was 5 or 6 years old hadn't really changed. That said, I recently watched, again, for the research for this book, I watched Superman and the Mole Men, the first George Reeves. They became episodes of the TV series.
But it was released as a feature film.
But it was released as a movie. Yeah. And I did think that he was a really good Superman. And I thought he was an okay Clark, but I could see why I didn't gravitate towards it when I was a kid. It was just a little too bland. It was just a little too what's the word I'm thinking of? It just didn't sing to me. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it.
No, and I think you're speaking the experience of most people, it was certainly by way of comparison with what the comics could accomplish, especially the Weisinger comics. Yeah, I mean, most episodes are gangsters, throwing their guns at Superman, right?
Right. But the key thing is you were never in a world without a Christopher Reeve Superman.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'm
not comparing. I'm not comparing. In other words, I wasn't comparing George Reeves to Christopher Reeve, at first, because there was no Christopher Reeve Superman at first.
You were just like, wow, this isn't like the comic books.
Yeah, and I wasn't even that big a fan of the comic books back then. That was it. I just felt like he didn't have any personality. Whereas Batman and Robin, there was life, there was color, it was excitement, action.
Definitely. I remember. Drawing a parallel, like I remember being a kid and looking at Superman comic books. This is pre John Byrne, and I found them very dull, and primarily because of Kurt Swan's art didn't do a lot for me as a kid.
I was the same way. I was the same way.
And it's funny because, again, now as I'm in my mid-40s, I have a certain amount of like, Kurt Swan. Like I like there's nostalgia, and I wonder if that definitely plays some role in how I look at George Reeves. I'm like, that's a cool, like, that version, I definitely and you and I have talked about this. I mean, as far as the comic books, I came in with the John Byrne reboot.
Sure.
That was, and for me, it was like, oh, this is like the movies. That's what I remember, right? He Superman looks like the movies, and it feels a little more modern. And so that was, with Man of Steel, the John Byrne Man of Steel. I mean, that started something for me that, for a good 20 years, it kept me going. But
same here. And the thing is that before John Byrne took over, I mean, and this is the funny thing. Before John Byrne took over, there were those Alan Moore stories. And there were a few Marty Pasco stories and a few Elliot Maggin stories that I would read here and there. And I was like, well, if Superman was like this all the time, I'd be reading it all the time. My Superman collection pre-Byrne was very spotty, spotty. Once Byrne came on, like you, I stayed with it for about 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that something like For the Man Who Has Everything, which is a pre-crisis story, Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, and it's fantastic. Right? I mean, you read it now, it still holds up. And you're like, nothing about Superman was so broken that you needed to just, erase the tape, so to speak, and just start over.
And that's one of the points that Elliot Maggin makes in my book, is when you've got all these years of history, why can't you use it to your benefit instead of just throwing it away?
Yeah.
I think that they could have gotten to where they wanted with Superman without doing a clean restart. In fact, so Byrne claims that he offered to do it that way, to take the first 6 months of his Superman and slowly build towards where he wanted Superman to be. And apparently DC wanted him to do a clean restart, new number one, new history, and all that. So they could have gotten there. They on the same token, I love what Byrne did.
Yeah.
There's very little that Byrne did that I disagreed with then or now.
I agree with that. Yeah, and by way of context for people listening, in 1986, in the lead up to Superman's 50th anniversary, DC was trying to make the character popular again, and they in the wake of a story called Crisis on Infinite Earths, where the company's continuity was sort of rewritten, they found like, okay, so let's just start over from scratch. So in other words, what we see with movie series all the time, where they just reboot it, DC Comics was actually ahead of the curve on that. But when I think about it in hindsight, and again, I say this as somebody, I came in with that reboot. I remember I was in grade school, and we used to get a newsletter called Scholastic News.
Wow. Well, you see, I have a history with that particular publication.
I forgot. That's right.
Oh, did you really? Oh, I thought you were going for something. No,
I totally forgot that you were.
I edited that magazine for 15 years.
100% forgot. So this is 86, it was Scholastic News with John Byrne's Superman on the front page. And it's the final page of Man of Steel #1, which is the first time we see Superman in flight.
Yep.
And, and I forget the exact verbiage, but essentially got into, this is the reboot and John Byrne and blah, 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 blah. Now, I was in, when did I read that issue? I was probably in second or third grade, something like that. And I was like, wow, and there was a little thing. And coming next year is the new movie, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. But anyway, that was when it was on my radar. I was like, oh, wow, okay. And so again, that's what got me into it. But it had the follow-on effect that I don't think I really became aware of until later. It had the follow-on effect of saying or implying everything that happened before this, that sucked.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. As a kid, that was, that's the stuff that sucked. This is the quote unquote real stuff, And I'm like, what a shame that is, because certainly now, I love the entire history of the character. I love all of it. I love all the ups and downs, And it DC for a little while there, they were actively sitting on their own history.
Yeah.
Which is such a shame.
Yeah, if they did that for a good long time. I remember when I was at Marvel, and there was this big clamoring for DC to collect Crisis on Infinite Earths into, a trade paperback or a hardcover, whatever. And DC always resisted because their attitude was that, well, that represents the old DC universe. We're focused on the new DC universe. And at Marvel, we were like, it's Marv Wolfman, it's George Perez, 12 issues of them touching in one way or another every single DC comic book character in history. And they're sitting on it. What are they, out of their freaking minds? And I just remember our one of our publishing executives saying, not only would we publish it, we'd publish the F out of it. You know what I mean? And they were sitting on it for all that time because it didn't represent the DC universe as they wanted it represented at that time. And there was a big clamoring for that. I don't know if you remember, but
I remember it took a long time for Crisis to be collected.
Yeah, they finally buckled under the pressure. Is really what it boiled down to.
And now it's like one of their evergreen titles. That I mean that's really silly because I'm not like a present tense comic book reader anymore, so a lot of this is just academic to me. But I've definitely reached a point where I'm much more on board with kind of the Grant Morrison of it all, where they say, look, it all counts. Everything counts. It's all part of the history. It's in there. You can acknowledge it or not acknowledge it. Everything counts. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's how it should be, honestly.
All of that used to really matter to me. And I've reached the point now where, to just put it bluntly, I just don't give a crap anymore. Yeah, it's just there are things that I like, there are things that I don't like, and I don't care about the continuity anymore, or I want to know what I'm reading. I want an understanding of what I'm reading. But if you bring in Vartox, some obscure character name like Vartox.
It's so funny you mentioned Vartox specifically, because I was just watching a video about Zardoz with my brother last week. And I was like, Vartox, that Superman villain, is based on, and I was literally, this is like exactly a week ago today, I was having that discussion with him. It's very funny.
Okay. All right.
So twice in a week, and I'm talking about Vartox. Who knew?
There you go. But if they want to bring that in, or they want to bring in, the Golden Age version of Mixiel Spitlik instead of the later I don't give a damn about that stuff anymore. Just tell me a good story.
Yep.
And it's I was one of those people who bought into, if it's before Crisis, other than Batman, which I loved, but if it's before Crisis, it doesn't matter, and it probably sucked.
Right.
And I've since gone back and bought some of the Supermans from like the 70s and the early 80s that I either used to have and got rid of, or I let fall apart or whatever. And I picked up a bunch of them, and I reread them, and I was like, this is fun stuff.
That's totally, you're like, it's fine. It's all fine.
It's fine. I don't love it as much as I didn't get the thrill that I got from reading the Byrne issues and the issues that followed even after he left. There was a thrill, a visceral excitement that I had, where I would open up a new Superman comic and I'd hear that John Williams music as I was reading, and that's how I knew it was a good comic. If I hear the John Williams music in my head as I'm reading it, it's a great comic. And for the longest time, from Byrne on, that was the case with Superman. John Byrne gave me the Superman that I wanted ever since I saw Superman the movie in 1978. That was the Superman I wanted, and that was the way I wanted Superman done in the comics. And he tapped into it, and the people who followed, whether it was Roger Stern or Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Louise Simons, all those people who followed in his footsteps. That's they tapped into that. They gave it to me, and it was a golden age for me. Let's put it that way.
Certainly you have. I would say. And I read Superman for the entire Crisis to Crisis period, from Crisis on Infinite Earths to Infinite Crisis in 2006. But I would say from about 86 to 96, let's say, and maybe that might be pushing it a little bit, but like that was this just for me, like just this great era. Every week I look forward to it. Maybe a little less than that, to be honest, because I think they had set it up in such a way where it was this weekly, every week there was a new Superman comic, and it was just a continuing story. And I think it got a bit cumbersome by the end there. With the sheer number of threads they had to navigate, but certainly through the death of Superman, which we'll talk about in just a second, and then I would say another year or so after that, it was rocking and rolling.
I would agree with you that that's around the time they started sputtering, and there was an editor in chief at Marvel, and I hate to give him credit. I hate to say he was right about something, but and it's not Tom DeFalco. I want to make that abundantly clear. It's not Tom. I love Tom. But when they did the Death and Return of Superman, and Superman came back, and I know we're going to talk about that, but when Superman came back, and there was that big issue, the grand issue where okay, the storyline is finally over, and this guy said, well, that's it then. They've shot their load. There's no place for them to go from here. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I said these are the great. I said this is the best line of comic books that in existence right now. I said we can learn from them. We should be doing what they're doing. And he said, once you've killed off a character and then brought him back, what else is there to do with him? There's no sense of jeopardy anymore because he's they're not going to kill him anyway, but they're not going to kill him again. So that's it. They've told the ultimate story. There's no place to go from here on. And I was like, what does he know? And within a year, I was like, damn it, he was right.
And I think that is accurate, especially when you think about the level of hype surrounding the death versus the level of hype surrounding the wedding, which was a couple years later, and it was, I would say, a fraction of what the death got.
Well, death sells.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah, we know that.
The couple of things going on is I don't think anything was going to top the death of, because so many people got fooled into believing that they were really killing him off, like this was going to be a permanent thing, and then they felt burned. No pun intended. They felt burned that the death didn't stick, and that all of the comics that they had hoarded, during the death era, they weren't going to be able to send their kids to college on the money that was going to bring in. And so by the time you get to the wedding event, it's kind of like, who cares? Who hum? We've already been burned once. You're not gonna trick us again. I think that was a big part of it. Yeah. I think the other thing was that by the time they did get married, and that was to tie in with the Lois and Clark TV show. Yeah. Lois and Clark was crapping the bed at that point. I mean, the show
by then, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got this TV show, which I would argue, on its worst day, had more viewers than the Superman comics had readers. But that's not to slam.
No, I mean that's just the different economics of TV and comics. I mean, that's just reality.
Exactly. Just in terms of if a Superman comic is selling, say, 500,000 copies, or has 500,000 readers, that's great for a comic book. That's death for a TV show.
Yeah.
So Superman, Lois and Clark was going downhill at that point. So you've got a TV show that isn't strong anymore. You've got a readership that is jaded because of the whole death and return stunt. I think that there was little chance that the wedding was going to generate as much buzz as the death did. Even though the wedding lasted, the death didn't.
You have to, I was thinking about that. I was like, the fact that we are 25, 26 years removed from the wedding, and they got rid of it for a little spell there, but kind of gravitated right back to that, says something about the essential effectiveness of that. And I think, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think fundamentally that gets the idea that Superman being single ultimately doesn't mean much, because we know as fans, as viewers, everyone else, well, Lois Lane, it's always Lois Lane.
Yeah, I do. I've come around to the position though that I think Superman does work better when you're at the default position, which is, he is hiding his identity from everybody, and there is this longing for Lois, but he can't truly reveal himself to Lois because all of the concerns that he'd have if she was in on the secret, if he that they putting her in all the stuff that's been part of the legend for so long. I do think that Superman works better in that regard. I certainly think he works better when he's not a parent. This is my personal opinion. I think Superman should be your big brother. He shouldn't be your dad. And I think that when
it's what you're saying, I do agree with that. I like that there are versions of, I like Superman and Lois, for example, but I like that is a version. I'm not following the current comics, but I know he has like an adult son now. Yeah. And that sort of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, because I'm just like, well, I feel like you're aging up the character for no reason there, Yeah,
I mean, they got around it by saying that the kid, I think there was time travel involved, so he left as a little kid and then came back maybe a month or two later, but because he was where he was for so long, he came back as an adult. So Superman hasn't gotten older, but the kid has. Regardless, I disagree. I have the same problem with Batman. That Batman has a kid also. I think Batman is your scary older brother, but he shouldn't be your dad.
He's your creepy uncle. See, because
I mean, the closest he should be to being a parent is well, I still say Dick Grayson, but that's me. But with Superman, yeah, I mean, the question, yeah, you don't want to get me started on that. But the question with Superman is how does he work best? And I do feel that he does work best when you get down to the core of it. And the core of it is if only you could know what I can really do. Yeah. And married, happy, domesticated with a kid, whether it's a teenager or a little boy, that takes it away from what I think is the purest part of the character. And I think most of the writers would agree with me.
And I think it's a little bit like, I mean, you can speak to this from your experience at Marvel, right? Like Spider-Man being married, right? Mm-hmm. I would say, just as a fan, I think there's more. I personally, I like Spider-Man being married, but I think there's more of an argument for Peter Parker being single. Because he has had a variety of love interests, and there is sort of that, trying to make it work with this girl or that girl. That's part of the character. I think with Superman, and this is just my observation, I think Lois, her presence in the story, her key presence in terms of shaping Superman's identity and being his partner, I think that is maybe just a reflection of how women's roles in society have changed also. We've moved past sort of Lois being just the damsel in distress and
sure. I'll be honest with you.
It's worth saying. I want to clarify. Lois was a progressive character from the jump. Mm-hmm. And I think that's worth recognizing, that, a crusading reporter who is respected and acknowledged as being a great reporter. I mean, in 1930s, that was pretty revolutionary.
Absolutely, and the way that Phyllis Coates played her in the first season of the George Reeves show, she was terrific.
She's great. Yeah, I agree.
I couldn't stand Noelle Neal. I mean, she just
didn't do as much for me, unfortunately. Yeah, I agree with that.
But I'm going to contradict myself for very briefly. I thought that the way Amy Adams and Henry Cavill, their relationship in the recent movies, I thought it worked.
Yeah, I think that between Man of Steel and Smallville and Superman and Lois, it is sort of a reflection of where I think many people perceive the character, where it's Superman's partner. It's his one true love and his partner. And I think that without contradicting what you're saying about the character works here, I think I'm kind of like I want to start there, and I wouldn't mind if we end up there. James Gunn is in the process of rebooting Superman yet again, and I'm assuming part of the reason he chose not to bring back Henry Cavill and sort of pick up is because he wants to start at something closer to formula.
Yeah.
With all of the toys still in the chest, and then be able to do whatever he's going to do.
That's what I suspect also. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel that a lot of what's been done over the last few years is the kind of stuff that works great as an Elseworlds or an imaginary story. And there's great – I mean, when I was a kid, I will say this. When I was a kid and I would dabble in Superman, some of the favorite stuff that I read were those in those digests where they would do imaginary stories where Superman and Lois are married and Lois gets killed and
right.
Superman has to raise their daughter by himself. And he ends up, if I remember correctly, the story ends up that he and the daughter end up on a parallel Earth, and he meets the Lois of that world, and they fall in love, and he has a new wife, Lois, and the kid has a new stepmother, who's her mother, And I thought that was charming as a little kid. Superman Red, Superman Blue. I think those were imaginary stories too. I don't remember if those were in continuity, but there are a lot of
that was imaginary story.
Okay,
yeah.
I thought those were really clever. So it's not like I'm opposed to that kind of stuff or reading that kind of stuff. I just have a problem with that becoming the main version, because then that means that the version that I like isn't being published anymore.
Well, and I think what you're saying is sort of. Because I basically agree, where it's like, again, something like Superman and Lois, I like, hey, that's that, and that's doing that thing. But I mean, we live in this prismatic age now where it really is like, look, pick your flavor and just go with it, because there's people who are like, well, no, Superman and Lois, that's Superman. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Or whatever, people who like Lois and Clark as their Superman, Smallville, etc. I think that itself is a reflection of how prominent this character is, that at this point you can have all these different interpretations, and it's almost a losing battle at this point to be like, well, this is the one that's quote unquote right, because it's like, well, this is the one that's right for me,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's exact. I mean, I one of the people I interviewed for the book was Mark Waid,
sure.
and he's.
And he was not a fan of the John Byrne reboot, as I recall.
No.
Yeah.
But as he said, he's made his peace with it. And we were talking about also the different flavors. And Mark has his own view of what, Superman should be, what is the best version of Superman and all that. But he's made his peace. He understands that, that era may well be gone forever, and you just kind of like have to deal with the hand that you're given, and you worship at the church of your choice, kind of thing. I think is the way he put it, which cracked me up too. I was laughing the way you are.
Obviously, of my affinity for binding comic book runs. I've spent several kids' college education worth of money binding my comics, but I have a custom bound run of Superman, which I have labeled From Crisis to Crisis. And I should say, I came up with that name before the podcast of the same name by Michael Bailey and Jeff Taylor.
Wow.
That just by chance I came up with that title, and they started doing that podcast. I was like, oh, there's something in the ether. But anyway, my point is, to me, I'm like 86 to 2006. That is, when it comes to the comics, that's my Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And I can jump in and read a title from before or after, but whenever I want to go home, home is right there, And I don't need it to continue on into the horizon. I'm like, no, there's an end point, and that's fine, And I would
you're
assume
more open-minded than I am.
yeah, I mean, I'm just like life's too short. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I might get to that. I might get to that philosophy at some point. But I'd still like to see more. In other words, I don't want to have to go back and read stories that I've already read to get the Superman that I want. That's all.
Yeah, no, I get it. But well, with that in mind, I wanted to touch on the death storyline real quick.
Sure.
I think the fact that we are now 30 plus years later and that story still has a very outsized imprint on Superman stories, not just in the comics, but in other media, really says something about what they accomplished. And I think what makes that even more remarkable is the fact that the death story itself was a bit of a Hail Mary, because they just needed to forestall the wedding for a little while.
There was that, but Mike Carlin did tell me, because he editor Mike Carlin, he oversaw Superman for a nice chunk of those glory years, and he said that's been a little bit misunderstood, and that they were kind of going in that way anyway, and that. That they were basically telling the classic hero's journey, the hero's myth, and that what's part of the hero's storyline is a death and a return, and that one of the things they wanted to do was show that Superman may have been taken for granted at the time, as the
which
good
he
guy
absolutely was.
Yeah. And so what happens when you take him out of the mix? What happens when there is no Superman? How will the world react? And that really was the story, is what happens to the world after Superman is taken out of it. And the weird thing that I don't think they were expecting, at least not to the level that it got, was that the real world did respond to it.
Man, but I remember... Yeah. I remember so many people. Now, I was one of the few people regularly reading Superman comics in like my circle at the time, But, oh my God, did you hear they're killing off Superman? What are they like? Is that it? It's over. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, he'll be dead for like a couple months and they'll bring him back. I mean, you read comics, I'm like, what's the matter with you people? I'm a little kid. I was in junior high at the time.
Right.
People are rending garments over this,
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was at Marvel at that point, so obviously I was keeping a close eye on what the guys across town were doing. And for me, it wasn't so a matter of if he's coming back, but how he's going to come back, and what is it going to disrupt this run of titles that I am absolutely loving. I didn't want it to change because I was loving it the way it was, and I was afraid that okay, he's going to come back? Is he going to have a new costume? Is he going to have, a new outlook on life? Or is he going to be doing things differently from the way I really like? Is he going to have a mullet? Is he? Yeah.
Now, this is the hill I will die on. It was not a mullet. It was long hair.
Okay, long hair. All right.
I've started fights for less over the.
Put up your dukes.
Yeah, that's right. It got drawn badly.
Okay.
Occasionally.
That's fair.
However, I think if we were to ask Dan Jurgens, he will say it was long hair, not a mullet.
All right. I will go with whatever Dan says. But yeah, I mean, Mike, the impression I got from speaking to Mike Carlin is the story wasn't so much prompted by we got to push this off the wedding, we got to push the wedding off because of the TV show, but he insisted that it was really prompted by the huge popularity at the time of the dark, violent heroes like Wolverine, the Punisher, Spawn, and that they didn't want Superman to be taken for granted, and they felt like the best way to do that was to do the story that they did. I'm sure that the wedding, the putting off of the wedding had something to do with it, but I think that there's a very good chance that they would have done this story no matter what. Maybe that would have been his honeymoon. Yeah, we got them. If they were able to do the wedding when they wanted to do the wedding,
Sure,
what if he gets killed on his honeymoon?
Right after he gets married, just like Spider-Man. Remember?
Just like Spider-Man, right?
Yeah,
I was just thinking that. So,
which could have been a compelling story. Now that you think about it,
Sure.
that year from the beginning of the Doomsday Story to the end of the Reign of the Superman, man, what that was! We were Superman fans. We were eating well, because it was like, at least for me, it was like finally everyone sees what I've seen.
Yeah.
For all these years that I've been reading these books, where and I should say, because I lived in Saudi Arabia when Man of Steel, when the reboot and all that happened, and there weren't a lot of American comics available. Adventures of Superman was one of the few American comics that was
That's
available.
amazing.
Yeah, and so it was awesome but frustrating because I was getting for about 4 years a quarter of a story.
Right.
So I was like, oh man, this shit is good. A bunch of other stuff, but hey, look at this. This is great, But
no trade paperbacks.
No trade paperbacks. None of that stuff.
Wow.
Comic books that were regularly available in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Marvel Tales. Adventures of Superman, and G.I. Joe.
Wow.
Yeah. So like my affinity for Marvel Tales was reprinting. I think a lot of like Marvel team ups during that era. So I have a lot of nostalgia for those. G.I. Joe is one of my favorite comics of all time. And then specifically the Jurgens and Art Tieber Adventures of Superman era. I just have a lot of fond memories of that,
Absolutely. No, it was a great run, and arguably, that wasn't even the best of that run. The stuff that was before the Death and Return was even better. But the Death and Return was terrific, and as Mike Carlin noted, it was the best selling comic series of all time.
It's amazing.
That whole run, the whole Death and Return.
That was for me. That was the cool thing because we moved back to the States summer of '92. So like it was like 2 months, 3 months before Doomsday started.
Wow.
And I was like, man, I'm so glad I'm here so I can read this entire story.
That must have blown your mind.
Oh, it was great. It was just such a good time. And so because the Death and Return, it spanned a full year. So it was the fall of my freshman year. Superman comes back like a week later or 2 weeks later. Lois and Clark starts.
Yep.
Again, yeah, we were eating good because you and I have talked about this. I think the first season of Lois and Clark is rock solid. I will hold that up with any other Superman content. Season 1, from stem to stern, I really like it.
There was some really good stuff in the first season. There was some really good stuff. I mean, some of my favorite episodes happened later on, but it was good. It was appointment TV for me, mostly because of Terry Hatcher, I must admit. But,
for many people, yeah.
Yeah, but no, it was solid the first year, and then it started to get goofy.
It got Batman 66 vibes as it continued,
Yeah, and then by the fourth season, it was a complete write-off.
I mean, it was really dog shit by the end. Like, it's amazing how it went from this consistent quality in year one to just absolute dog shit by the end. It's amazing.
Well, that's one of the things that I talk about in the book is that Superman is at his best when the people working on him truly love him and care about him. And that when you see these dips in the quality, whether it's the movie series or the TV series or even the comic books, you when you look back on that stuff, it becomes really abundantly clear that whoever was working on him at that time didn't love him the way they should have. Weren't giving him the TLC that any comic book character, any fictional character needs to thrive. And it was funny because I was writing this. I mean, this was one of the themes that I was really going to be hitting home on. And when I was interviewing Mark Waid, he said it almost word for word. What I was trying to get across in the book is that really the character is at his best when the people who are working on him truly do love him. When they see him as just a commodity, when they see him as just equity, an intellectual property to exploit.
Yeah,
that's it. It becomes really obvious. And when you look back, I mean, I get into the Zack Snyder Superman as well. Elliot Magan has some very great comments about that whole take, and I think I think and this is a point that I made when I saw Batman versus Superman at a sneak preview, and I walked out, utterly depressed. Which was, it was abundantly clear. And Zack Snyder denied this because when I interviewed him, I kind of challenged him on it. And he denied it up and down. But let's face it, the guy doesn't love Superman. He certainly doesn't understand Superman. Maybe he thinks he loves Superman, but he doesn't understand Superman. And it showed. It showed in Man of Steel. It certainly showed in Batman versus Superman. And I'm one of the few people out there that I know of that actually prefers the Joss Whedon Justice League because, God damn it, they got Superman right in that one.
Well, let's do a little lightning round. I'm gonna go through some different Superman media incarnations.
Sure.
And I want you to drop either some of your opinion or maybe something that you found interesting in covering them, for the bookazine.
Okay.
So we've talked about the Chris Reeve films. Is there anything new that you found about that era?
Just that I think that if you only go by Richard Donner's version of events, you would think that Ilya Salkind in particular didn't bring anything to the table. And having spoken to Ilya Salkind and having done the research, I found that he was a bit more influential in the Superman we got than certainly I think Richard Donner would want you to believe. I mean, Richard Donner was instrumental, but Ilya Salkind did have a role to play in getting us the Superman that we got in the Christopher Reeve movies.
Well, Salkind was, of course, involved with the Superboy television series. What are your thoughts on that?
I never really watched it. I was in college at the time, and I think it was on like Saturday mornings. And I was asleep. I wasn't waking up for Superboy. Although I will say there was one truly great thing to come out of that, and that was Stacey Haydock as Lana Lang.
Well, how about the Superman animated series from 19? Actually, well, there's two animated. There was the 1988 animated series that Marv Wolfman was story editor of, and then there was the one about 8 years later, the 1996 animated series from Bruce Timm and Paul Dini.
Okay, I caught maybe the first two episodes of the Marv Wolfman Ruby Spears 1988 series because again I was in college and I wasn't going to wake up on Saturday morning.
They gave that like the death slot, like 7 a.m. or something ridiculous Saturday morning.
Oh wow, okay, well yeah, then it was doomed from my perspective. But I remember watching like the first couple. I was like, oh cool, they're really leaning into the Byrne stuff. So I thought that was cool. But with regard to the Bruce Timm Paul Dini version or the DC animated universe, I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was fantastic. I just terrific. It was, and they did some great stuff that improved upon the comics. I thought the solution they came up with in terms of how to do Brainiac was terrific.
Yeah, it really it was this perfect synthesis of the then current mythology. And yet incorporating, the totality of the character. And yeah, I mean, it I would hope that James Gunn would look at what that show did.
Yeah.
As a way to make a lot of this stuff palatable to a modern audience, Agreed.
I thought it was terrific. I really thought it was a terrific series.
And by the way, fun fact about the 1988 series, Bo Weaver, who did the voice of Superman, went on to not much longer after that, about 5 years later, he was the voice of Reed Richards in the Marvel Action Hour Fantastic Four series.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
Yeah. So every time I watch Fantastic Four, I'm like, that's Superman. He was a good voice for him, though. And by the way, they used the John Williams theme.
Yes.
But they only had the rights to 30 seconds of it. So if you because they released a soundtrack album, and the music is by Ron Jones, who from Next Generation, and it's like you hear the opening, it's like, yep, at exactly 30 seconds, it turns into this other thing.
Right. I do remember that from watching like the first couple of episodes. I remember that, yes, they used the theme and then all of a sudden it became something else.
Something different. And it's sort of kind of sounds like it, but not really,
Yeah.
Smallville. Now this is a show that had a very long life, 10 seasons for many, many people who came up during that era. This is their Superman, but I would assume for you, I mean, you were past the demographic, the primary demographic for a show like this. What did you think of Smallville?
I watched the first few years, and I will say I was quite moved by the first Christopher Reeve guest appearance.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. There were tears rolling from my eyes by the end, because not only did Christopher Reeve appear on the episode, but if you remember, at the very end of the show, they played some of the John Williams music.
That's right.
And it was the first new use of the John Williams music in years. So for me, it hit like a ton of bricks. I was very emotional about that. After a while, I did give up on it. I thought that that the plots just got too ridiculous for me, and I just didn't care anymore. And I felt like they were stretching it out so much that, of all the things he could not do yet, where that he should have been able to do at that point, as Superman, or as in terms of his superpowers. And then I came back for like the last couple of years, mostly because of Erica Durance.
Yeah, I hear that.
I thought she was a terrific Lois Lane. Ultimately, I felt that by the time they got to the end, they kind of crapped the bed with Doomsday. I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah, what was that, like the 8th season, I think? Yeah,
maybe even later. I thought Doom. I don't even remember anymore. Oh, and then the build up to Darkseid.
Darkseid, yeah.
Which turned out to be a complete, big nothing burger. But I don't know. I just if you're gonna go on such a grand scale, you better have the equipment to pull it off, and they just didn't. But I thought that Tom Welling was really good. I thought that Erica Durance was terrific. I thought that Kristen Kroik was a pretty good Lana. I thought that Michael Rosenbaum was a great Luthor.
Yeah, he was fantastic. I was a big fan of John Schneider in that role. Anyway,
yeah, he was good.
I think in real world terms, he's sort of the opposite of Jonathan Kent. Feels like sometimes, but
is he really?
Yeah, he's kind of one of these, MAGA.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, then he and Dean Cain can hang out.
That's what I'm saying. It's you got the Clark from this one and the Jonathan from that one.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
All right. I didn't know. I wasn't following John Schneider's political leanings, so I wasn't aware. But I know about Dean Cain. But anyway, yeah. I thought that Smallville was up and down. I have very mixed feelings about Smallville.
Well, I think for me, Smallville, I think that 10-year span might have been the period where I kind of like the switch flipped for me, where I'm like, okay, this thing is the mythos. Superman is going to reinvent all the time, and I can't always expect it to be like my thing, because that was me. Like on the front end, I was like, oh, this is great. It's kind of like the post-crisis version, and we're going to kind of end up here. And then as we keep going, you're like, I had a conversation with Miles Millar and Al Goff about a year ago. about the whatever the 20th anniversary, and that's what I told them. I was like, I had to make that realization. Like this is its own thing. This is
right.
I can't expect this to end up where I thought it was going to. They're doing their own thing, and I just either I'm okay with it or I'm not.
Exactly. Yeah, I came to the same conclusion. So I'm totally in sync with you on that.
Superman Returns came out right in the middle of that run. Now we talked about Brandon Routh a little bit. Have you revisited that movie in the whatever it's been now? The 15, 17 years since it came out.
I have, and I'll tell you, I was on cloud nine walking out of the theater after seeing it and seeing all the possibilities, the story possibilities that they could go with from that point on. And every time I watch it, I think less and less of it. I have to say, it has nothing to do with Brandon Routh. I still think, and I'll tell you, he proved he could be a great Superman. In of all places, the CW. You know what I mean?
Right? The Crisis on Infinite Earths story that they did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that he got a chance to do it again. I'm glad he got a chance to sort of redeem himself because I knew he could be a good Superman, and he was. I thought that, I don't know if we're supposed to say his name these days. I thought Kevin Spacey was a solid Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
I thought that Kate Bosworth was a non-entity as Lois, and when I found out all of the other actresses who tried out for the part, and didn't get it, I want to smack Bryan Singer right in the face.
Well, for a variety of reasons.
But specifically in this conversation for that.
Yeah.
Kerry Russell was she was actually reading the lines. I mean, she was there to like feed Brandon Routh the lines when he was auditioning.
You can
she
totally
was right
see
there
her
on
as
the
Lois.
damn set.
She would have been great. She would have been great.
Oh yeah, Amy Adams had tried out for it. She would. I mean, a million choices he could have had.
I think Rachel McAdams was in the mix, I believe.
Oh, where is he? Where is he right now? When I found him?
Yeah, I think the problem with that film in hindsight is that it doesn't really evoke, except in a very superficial sense, the ethos of the Richard Donner movie. I think, because Donner, there was a lightness to it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm sort of fascinated by like what did you see in that movie or those movies, Bryan Singer, that this is your homage to it? Right.
Exactly. It's I mean, on the one hand, it was too beholden to the Richard Donner movie,
right?
And on the other hand, it wasn't beholden enough because it didn't have the charm.
That's right.
It had the plot, and you know what? My wife, who is not a huge comic book fan, and she loves Star Wars. She loves all the stuff that we love, but she's not a diehard. She's kind of like a civilian with one foot in our world.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah. Like my wife. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we went to see Superman Returns. This was my second time seeing it, and we're walking out of the theater, and I still liked it. I was still enthusiastic about it. And I said to my wife, "What did you think?" And she said, "He's so glum. This whole movie was so – he doesn't smile once. Where's the joy? Where's the happiness? He's so sad throughout the whole movie." And I was like, "Really? That's what you got out of it?" And now I've come around to her way of thinking. She's absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the issue I had with that movie is it centers on a conceit that I cannot buy. The notion that Superman would be like, "Hey, I think Krypton's still there. Peace out, y'all." I refuse to believe any version of Superman would ever do that.
All you needed was one line of dialogue to solve it. Because, if he found out Krypton still existed, he would go. But all you need is one line of dialogue. My ship was hit by an asteroid en route, and I was thrown off course, and it took me 5 years to do this journey. I was expecting to only be gone for a few weeks.
Yeah. I mean, this is the problem, right? The notion that he would just leave Earth unprotected. And the problem related to that is the journey to Krypton has no bearing on anything in that story.
Right.
So it was, I mean, it could have been anything. You know what I mean? You could say
It could have been anything.
I was trapped in the Phantom Zone. Or, I mean, it didn't matter that he went to Krypton, but it makes Superman seem selfish.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you could have gotten around it. It's just they didn't think it through well enough to think about the character. That's the key thing.
The novelization of the film was written by Marv Wolfman.
Yeah.
And boy, God bless him. He tried so hard to lend some credibility to it. But I mean, I think just fundamentally that's the problem, especially because in terms of the chronology that ostensibly Singer was working off of, this is set mere weeks after Superman is at the White House, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I was gone, Mr. President. I won't let you down again, except for a couple weeks from now when I'll be gone for 5 years."
No, you don't understand, Zaki. He was picking up from the Donner version, which doesn't have that scene.
Oh, that's right. So unfortunately, it's swing and a miss. I do appreciate the swing in certain regards, but unfortunately, it didn't pan out. Now that being said, I collect Superman memorabilia, which I know you've seen some pictures of, and I'm glad to have Superman Returns merch as part of that. Part of that whole catalog. I'm happy it's in the equation, and then just to kind of wrap up the discussion, we alluded to it a little bit. You have complicated feelings vis-a-vis the Zack Snyder corner of the DC universe.
Yeah.
Now my recollection is that you and I both liked Man of Steel.
I liked Man of Steel with two glaring exceptions.
Okay.
One is, well, you know what? Let's make it three.
Okay.
The first is Jonathan Kent saying, "Yeah, maybe you should have let those kids die to protect your secret."
Okay. Well, now, to be fair, I'm gonna offer my counterpoint.
Okay.
If you watch the scene, it's him not knowing what the thing to do, and I think when you situate that in context with Jonathan's scene later in the movie, not the swept away by the tornado scene, but later when he's talking to Clark about the man that he is going to be and who he chooses to be, you get more of a sense of Jonathan himself is just trying to deal with a bigger problem than he fully understands, fully knows how to deal with. Like, I don't know what the right thing is as far as what's more important, protecting you as a father. I want to protect you. I don't know what's more important. And I think that there is some complexity to that, which I appreciate.
All right. Well, my position is that Jonathan wouldn't, be struggling with what's the right thing to do. I mean, he would just know that's the whole point of his character and Martha's. They are the foundation upon which Superman was built. So they have to know what the right thing to do is. So I had a problem with that, although I acknowledge your point. I thought, him telling Clark to let him die in the tornado was just disgusting to me.
That I'm not a big fan of. Yeah.
Utterly ridiculous. Yeah, make your mother a widow, Clark. I mean, I'd like to know what the state of their marriage was at the time. Let me die in this tornado. I got to get away from her. I'm serious. It's like what? Who thinks like that? Number two and number three. I get what they were going for with the whole killing of Zod, but I think it was executed, no pun intended, pretty poorly. I thought that on a technical level, it was really effective. I thought it was very realistic, very well done in that regard. I thought that from a writing standpoint, I don't care how early in his career Superman is, he should have been trying harder to get the fight away from people, civilians. That was the whole point of the fight in Superman 2 is get them, quit, make them think I'm quitting, get them to the fortress where they're going to be away from people. No one's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So those are my fundamental problems with Man of Steel. but it got worse from there.
Yeah, I know that you and I disagree about Snyder's cut of Justice League.
We do?
Yeah, my recollection is that I liked that one substantially more than you did.
Do you like the Zack Snyder version of Justice League more than the Joss Whedon version?
I like the film overall better, but I will grant that I really like the way Superman is portrayed in the in the Snyder. The Whedon cut, I really like Superman in that, but I think as a film, the Snyder version of Justice League is leagues ahead of that, in my opinion.
Okay, we'll have to agree to disagree on that then, because I mean, what's the we'll have another whole 2-hour conversation if we talk about that. But no, I prefer the Whedon version. I think the Whedon version has a lot of problems. But if I'm going to watch one or the other, it's going to be the Whedon version.
I mean, I think ultimately the entire decision to hand it off to Whedon was ill-conceived for a variety of reasons. I mean, ultimately, if we're talking about artistic integrity, I've said all along, I'm like, look, Zack Snyder got hosed in all of this, and this is irrespective of whether one agrees or disagrees with his version. I'm just like, he got the job based on, they agreed to it. You know what I mean? Like this is like saying, you've laid down the tracks and the train is already running, but we want you to tear up the tracks and relay them while the train is already moving.
Right.
So I mean, my heart goes out to him, not just because of the family tragedy that he experienced, which no parent even wants to imagine. But I mean,
absolutely,
he got screwed because I think it's a reflection of how utterly disorganized Warner Brothers management was and has been, and presumably still is. I mean, honestly, even with James Gunn, you know, I'll believe it when I see it that he has the rope available to tell the stories that he wants to tell. You know.
Well, we'll find out soon enough. I mean, yeah, there is the whole thing about, you know, you leave the dance with you know, the guy who brung you, you know, but I will tell you that, and I think you and I have talked about this before. Maybe we haven't, but I interviewed Zack Snyder before Batman versus Superman was released.
Okay.
And we talked about Justice League because he was about 6 weeks from starting filming Justice League when I interviewed him. And he was optimistic, and you know, we were talking about Batman versus Superman. I hadn't seen it yet, and he was like talking about how he felt the movie was and what it said and all that kind of. And then maybe a couple of days later, I went to an advanced screening of Batman versus Superman, and this was about 2 or 3 weeks before the rest of the world got to see it. This was an advanced private press screening. And I literally walked out utterly depressed and with having lost faith in humanity. I mean, that's how down I was after seeing that movie. And my first reaction was, this is the guy who's going to be doing Justice League? And so when I heard that this was at the beginnings that Warner Brothers was having second thoughts, and they were starting to kind of put the screws to Snyder to lighten up, and I was like, good. I was like relieved, because it was like this can't go on. You know, if this is his vision of what the DC universe should be, they've got to do something. And so I was actually in Warner Brothers' corner when I heard that they wanted to switch gears. And that, you know, and so I probably lean much more towards the executives than you do, except I think they went about it in a really ham-fisted, you know, sloppy way.
That's kind of my point ultimately, is like, look, the train had left the station. I'm gonna stay with the train metaphor. You know, the time for them to get involved was before they agreed to what, you know, like at that point.
But they didn't know. But they didn't know. They thought that Batman versus Superman was going to make $1 billion. They thought that they had a screening of Batman versus Superman. The Warner Brothers execs thought it was terrific.
Okay,
they didn't know what they were dealing with.
well, no, but I will stipulate that. So in that situation, you know what you do? You say we're not going to greenlight Justice League until Batman versus Superman comes out. So then you have potentially a year or two to make whatever adjustments you need.
Oh, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
it. So Batman versus Superman comes out in March, and in April they're going to start filming Justice League. Sorry, guys.
Yes,
the hall is booked.
Yeah,
You know?
you're absolutely right. You are 100% right. They should have shut down Justice League right when they got the returns on Batman versus Superman, when they saw the reviews and the fan response. They absolutely at the 11th hour they should have shut down and retooled Justice League. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, either you shut it down or you say, well, this is what we're doing, and it is what it is. But regardless, at this point, it is a closed loop anyway. I think partially for me, I can look at those Man of Steel, BBS, and Snyder's Justice League, and I'm like, well, this is that story, and I don't, and I can be fine with it ultimately. And I think that's what it really comes down to. You know, we're talking about sort of like you can have great stories and not necessarily want that to be where you live forever. You know, I think one of the greatest Superman stories, in my opinion, is Kingdom Come.
And I talk about that in the book. I actually gave more space to Kingdom Come than I thought I was going to, but once I read it again, I couldn't put it down. I mean, I was so sucked in. Yes, it is one of the great Superman books.
It really is, but it's also, I don't want that to be the status quo.
Right.
And I think that's part of why a story like that works. And I think that's sort of why I'm where I'm at now, where it's like, you know what, just give me a good story. And then I'll close the book and move on to the other thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up this discussion, we ran the gamut, and I'm so grateful that you gave me the time to sort of geek out with you about this. I mean, this is a character both of us have such deep affinity for.
Oh, I'm grateful you gave me the time. What are you kidding?
Well, what is sort of your having been a fan of the character? And you know what, I wanted to mention real quick. You know, the Superman project which you got to edit.
Oh,
which is
right.
Which is the Incredible Hulk versus Superman, or Superman versus the Incredible Hulk. I forget who comes first.
We published it, so the Hulk came first. That made me one of the very few Marvel editors in history to have edited a story featuring Superman. It was a delight. It was I originally Stan Lee was supposed to write that. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, originally the plan was Stan Lee was going to write it. That's what got the project greenlit in the first place. DC was thrilled with that idea, and Stan and I spent quite a bit of time talking about it, and ultimately had to bow out for various reasons. And I had lined up Steve Rude to draw it, and once Stan bowed out, I thought this project was dead. Steve Rude kept calling me periodically. When are we going to start? When are we going to start? Let's get this thing going. Let's even if Stan can't do it, let's. And ultimately, I decided Roger Stern, who had written both characters marvelously, no pun intended, and DC signed off on that. And the concept was that it would take place early in their careers. So we're talking John Byrne, Man of Steel era Superman, where he's at the beginning of his career, and have it be at the same time coinciding with the earliest days of the Hulk. So you've got the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby Hulk, which obviously Steve Rude excels at drawing.
Right.
And so he drew a Max Fleischer quasi John Byrne version of Superman and a Jack Kirby Hulk, and we set it in the past. And we had Lex Luthor, the Man of Steel era Lex Luthor, so he still had some of his red hair.
Yeah, he had the Fred Mertz thing going on.
Yeah, and it was a delight. It was an absolute delight. And my counterpart at DC on that project was Joey Cavallari, who I'm still in touch with.
Doing the Superman books at the time, right?
He was editing the Superman books at the time, and it was a blast. It was a total delight. And if that's the only Superman story that I am directly involved in as a comic book professional. I think that's, I mean, that leaves me in good standing. I think it was just a joy. It was one of the very last projects that I worked on before I left Marvel.
Well, naturally I have that book included in my bound collection. But what's so great about that book is that it rewards people who know the continuity.
Yeah, but
it doesn't require it.
Exactly.
You can just drop in.
Yeah. Well, that's Roger Stern is a master of that.
Yeah.
He was, firing on all the cylinders, and I couldn't be prouder of him or of Steve Rude. It was a project that really came together organically, because like I said, I'd pretty much given up when Stan bailed out, and Steve Rude was the one who just kept the fire burning, and until finally I got back on board, kind of like emotionally, and I was like, okay, and put the offer out to Roger, and we discussed the story, and he took it from there, and it was terrific.
And he really evokes that Stan Lee style. While it's still very much Roger Stern, but I mean, it has this kind of Silver Age Marvel vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the funny thing is it's I think it may be the only DC Marvel crossover where there is no Marvel villain in it to sort of counterbalance the DC villain, because there's always you put these heroes together, there's going to be one of his villains.
It's not like Luthor and the Leader.
Right, who didn't exist yet,
Yeah, wow, I didn't even think about that. But that just tells you, the story just worked so well, I didn't even need to think about that.
Exactly. I mean, that was what was so great about it. And I'll tell you a quick little story if you have time.
Of course. Yeah.
When I was working out the story with Stan, and I had that concept already, said it in the early days, so we don't have to. We just deal with both characters in their purest form, and I was mapping all this out with Stan, and I said, so let's go back to the days when nobody knew that Bruce Banner was the Hulk. So he still had his secret identity. We can play with that fact. And he said, that was the greatest, when nobody knew who Bruce Banner was. They didn't know that he was the Hulk. That was the way the concept worked best. Why the hell did they change that? And I didn't have the heart to tell Stan he was the one who did that. He was the editor and he was the writer. That was right in the midst of his run on the Hulk in Tales to Astonish. So I was like, and I think I said to him, yeah, Stan, I don't know why they came up with that. I don't know what to tell you. And I was like, just move along.
That's very on brand for Stan Lee. Wasn't he like, who married Peter Parker and Mary Jane? What kind of dumb idea was that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why'd they kill off Gwen Stacy, even though he was the editor, right?
I had no idea. I was out of town. They didn't tell me anything.
So as we wrap up this discussion, I want to give you the floor. I mean, what is sort of a culminative message about Superman that you'd like to give the listeners to as they hopefully race out to their newsstands to pick up the story of Superman?
That Superman is the greatest superhero that's ever been created. And he has the potential to be great when he's in the hands of writers and artists who love him, who understand him, who know how to tell stories about him. He's got 85 years of history to prove that. And whenever there's a down period for Superman, there's always hope that the next period is going to be another great one, which is appropriate because Superman is all about hope. He's all about us aspiring to be the best that we can be. And we need that. I think we need that now more than ever. Somebody to call us to our better angels and say, let's try to get along. Let's try to love people. Let's try to respect people. Let's try to do good. There's no harm in doing good.
Well, that's a message that is never out of date. So thank you for reiterating that. And thank you, Glenn, for taking time out of your Saturday to hang out with us here. For me, it's just any opportunity to geek out with you is always something I look forward to. So I appreciate that.
Same here. I feel absolutely likewise. And this has been a really great discussion.
So the bookazine is on newsstands everywhere. It can also be ordered online and at Amazon. Is there a specific link where people can go to order it?
I would say it's easier than Amazon is to go to magazineshop.us. That way you can order it directly from the publisher. Because for some reason I haven't seen it on Amazon, and I'm not sure why. But magazineshop.us. And just type in Superman, and it'll take you right to it. Or you can buy it at Barnes & Noble. You can buy it at supermarkets, pharmacies. In fact, I just saw a picture on Facebook this morning. No less a figure than Roy Thomas took a picture of himself at the supermarket holding a copy of this book.
That is pretty cool. Legendary comic book writer Roy Thomas.
Exactly.
And if people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Glenn L. Greenberg. I'm on Facebook. I can be there. I'm on LinkedIn at I think Glenn L. Greenberg. But Twitter. I know my Twitter handle off the top of my head, which is at Glenn L. Greenberg.
And definitely, folks, seek Glenn out. He's always ready to answer questions and just share geekery with you. So I feel very fortunate. I have known Glenn in the online space now for almost 20 years, and I hope you don't mind me saying I consider you as much a friend as anybody who I've shared actual space with.
I feel the same way. I absolutely feel the same way. No, it's you're the friend I've never met.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you have any questions or comments for us here, you can email us at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit like on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. And if you have any, kind thoughts, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, leave a star rating. Every little bit helps. And you can find me personally on Twitter at Zaki's Corner. That's ZAKIS Corner, and also at the San Francisco Chronicle, where my articles and reviews go up regularly. On behalf of my guest, Glenn Greenberg, my name is Zaki Hassan. This has been Nostalgia Theater. Thanks, everybody. Catch you next time.